We have fought for freedom of so many countries of the world. America's been free. And it's been free because we are willing to fight for freedom throughout the world. And if we don't, then we'll be fighting for freedom on our own soil. And these are the things we have to visit with daily. But I thought, no, you can come see Art from the Heart, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. What I decided to talk about today was about a soldier, a hero. He was a hero. This soldier was born in Hailey, England. And he came to the United States after having spent 5 years in the British Army. He had fought communism in Rhodesia and Cyprus for the British Army. He had met an American soldier who was an undercover operative for the U.S. government and convinced him to join the United States Army. So he came to America in 1965 and he joined the United States Army. 6 months later, he's at a battle that is called the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. Some of you may have heard about it. Several years ago, Mel Gibson did a show that was entitled, We Were Soldiers Once. And this young man fought at that battle. He was decorated for his heroism at that battle. Remember, the young man wasn't an American citizen. Why did he come to America? Because he knew we were the only country strong enough to fight communism, and he hated communism. Because what did communism do? It took all of your freedom away from you. Well, that young man got out of the service, managed to get his citizenship, managed to get a law degree in Clemson, eventually moved on to get a job as vice president in charge of security for a major corporation named Morgan Stanley. Now, somewhere along the line, he found himself in a bout with cancer. And he defeated it, just as he had done at the Ia Drang Valley when he defeated the enemy. On September the 11th, Rick Rescorla, Vice President of Security of Morgan Stanley, lost his life. But what had he done at Morgan Stanley? Here's a guy that was a real, true warrior, a real soldier. And on 9/11, because he knew from his own intel network throughout the world and had actually prophesied that the World Trade Centers would be attacked by terrorists. That video is in my museum, and if you watch that, you will shudder that someone could actually predict what was going to happen. When the bombings took place in 1993 in the basement, Rick Rescorla was vice president, and due to his superior leadership, very few injuries took place. But on September the 11th, when the first plane struck, he called his good friend Dan Hill. Remember the gentleman that convinced him to join the United States Army while they were fighting communism in Rhodesia? He said, "What do you think?" And Dan says, "It's a bad one. They've hit you bad." He said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm getting ready to get my people out of the building." He said, "Well, you better get them out quick." He said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the first tower is going to fall over and hit yours and take you out." And just a few minutes later, a plane struck Trade Center number 2. And Dan Hill said, "Well, where are you?" He said, "I'm down around the 20th floor. He said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I got most of my people in the stairwells going down." He said, "Well, you better get out of there." He says, "Why?" He says, "Because this one has gone right to the core of the building. There's a chance your building's going to come down first." He says, "I got them all on the move." And he's taking them down through the stairwell. But you have to know things about Rick Rescorla. He had lighting system re-engineered throughout all the stairwells in World Trade Center 2 because he knew something was going to happen. He had lighting systems put in there. He had additional air conditioning systems built into the system. And he had bullhorns set in certain places so he could talk to the people. He had actually performed drills where people would leave the building. Now, can you imagine taking 30 floors of 3,700 employees out of a building on like a fire drill? You know, you weren't very well liked, were you? But Rick never gave up on that. 2-3 times a year, he would evacuate everybody down to the ground floor. Now, this is a multi-million-dollar daily running operation by the hour. But he knew what would happen. When Rick got down to the ground floor, he called Dan Hill, and he says, "What do you think?" He says, "I think the buildings are going to come down soon." And he said, "Which one?" He says, "I think yours is going to come down." He said, "What are you doing, Rick?" He says, "Well, I've got almost 3,700 of them out of the building." He said, "Well, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going back in. I think there's a few that I've missed." Rick made a decision to go back in because he couldn't account for 6 people. The building came down on Rick Rescorla. Here is a man that made a conscious decision to give his life for his fellow man. He actually believed that because of his military training and a thing called the final sweep, where you go back out and check a battlefield, was his obligation. It wasn't something he thought about. He knew it. He had to do what he did. He went back into that building. And the last thing he said to his friend Dan Hill is, "Take care of Susan. She's a wreck. Take care of her." Can you see the calmness? This is what Dan Hill told me. He says he was calm. He says, "Here's a totally terrorizing situation. Explosions going all around, fire, people jumping out of windows, buildings just, you just knew this was total chaos." And Rick was totally calm. And to this day, he is truly credited with having saved 3,700 lives. Now, very few of you ever heard anything that makes sense of 9/11. But heroism makes sense to all of us. It makes sense to every single one of us. That when a man chooses to give his life to save others, that's what makes this country so great. When people ask me the difference between America and any other country of the world, I frequently will cite examples of in 1998, there was a major earthquake in Kyoto, Japan. 20,000 people died. And do you know why they claimed that many died? Because no one reacted. They estimate 10,000 lives would have been saved if the sense of volunteerism that exists in America existed in Japan. Tsunami. Remember the tsunami? How quickly we were criticized. Most of you do not know this, but one of the Navy fleets was pumping fresh water the day after the tsunami struck. Fresh water. The people who would have been dying had it not been for the reaction of our people. And do you know that all the countries of the world who donated money to the victims of the tsunami would not equal what private citizens in America donated? So when we talk about volunteerism, we talk about 9/11, we talk about a call to save this country, every day we seem to feel we're being assaulted from every possible direction that has negativeness to it. And that's when it has to rise deep inside of you to do the right thing. What did Rick Rescorla do that day? He did the right thing. He had no choice. He did the right thing. I would leave you with the thought of this. Do the right thing. You have to think about what that means. And when I said I had thought about many things to talk to you about, today is a day of remembrance. And if I were to have all of the people that were here from 9/11 here, and they were able to see what we were going to do today to honor them, to recognize them, to watch the young leaders of America perform for them, to watch all of you be here when you could have been somewhere else, do you not think they'd be very proud? You better believe they would. Do you not think they wouldn't stand and applaud you because you have made a sacrifice by choice, not by command? God bless you, and thank you very much.